Hi Perry. Firstly, thank you so much for coming on this call. It's really good to see you, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me, Pete. I'm looking forward to it.
I think you've got obviously a pretty broad background, and you've gone on a really interesting leadership journey, and so I really want to dive straight into hearing a little bit about where you've come from and your journey to where you are now, very much from a leadership perspective. So obviously talking about your jobs and what you've done, but how you've kind of built as a leader in sports, really.
Yeah, I think you touched on it there. It was very broad. It was very diverse. Sort of in my twenties, it was probably typical route a lot of people sort of in these positions take. I finished school, took a year out, went travelling. Wasn't convinced university was for me. Went anyway. Still wasn't convinced. Went travelling again. But in that sort of time, I went into the fitness industry, exercise and fitness industry. Did my level 2, level 3. And when I came out of uni, I was offered a job as a gym manager and an activities coordinator for a local community, which for a 23-year-old was sort of big responsibility. So that was probably my first, and I'm going to put in quotations, managerial role, because I'm not sure I was much of a leader back then. But it was very early days, but really diverse sort of responsibilities that I had, engaging sort of special populations in Parkinson's groups, childhood obesity initiatives, cardiac rehab. We did primary school physical education provision, and that was on top of managing a sort of a general population's gym and personal trainers and managers within that. So really diverse, really enjoyed it. I look back at that time and think that actually I got a lot of satisfaction helping those groups of people. I learned a lot of skills, trying to gain funding for these initiatives, for building relationships with very sort of diverse populations and stakeholders to get these groups off the ground and into the gym and exercising. So that was probably my first experience of managing and leading, if you will. I then decided that I wanted to work with elite populations and went back to university and did a master's. That was probably when I was around 27. And I worked with various groups: youth tennis, youth fencing. I did some work with TAS athletes, and that was around in the build up to 2012. And then I was fortunate enough to start working at QPR. Started off with the women's teams there, and then after a season, was invited in to do some work with the academy. And back then, that was pre EPPP, for anyone that knows what that is. But it's the governance now that sort of mandates what academies can and can't do and should and shouldn't do, and the resources they need to put into the academy. And so it sort of grew from there. I went from part-time casual to full-time to lead to then head of academy sports science and medicine. And then I left there and came to Arsenal. I'm still there at the moment, and I was lead strength and conditioning coach for the academy there at their youth academy. And then just over 2 years ago, I took the role of head of academy performance, which in essence is what I was doing at QPR. So it's basically I look after the medical stream, nutrition, psychology, sports science, and strength and conditioning for age groups 9 to 21. So less on the grass, less operational, more strategic and away from the grass now. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle stop tour, I suppose.
No, that's great. I mean, it's interesting to hear that your journey wasn't typical in terms of finish school, straight to uni, masters straight away, straight into your job, and then you're in your career. You've kind of hopefully shown our listeners that there are different ways of doing this, and you've kind of dipped in and out of years out. You've done some uni, you've worked, you've gone back to uni and done the masters. Throughout all that period and your early roles as a manager and leader, were there any things early on that began to shape your leadership style?
Um, I've actually thought about this recently as a parent as well, and I think um, a leadership theory has moved away from the great man, the trait approach, but I think we're very much shaped by the environments that we're exposed to early on. So it'd be sort of naive of me not to mention sort of childhood and the role that parents play, and sort of the influence of early friends as well within that. So I think, learning, behaviours, whether it be integrity, discipline, respecting all people, how you go about your business. I think is that there's a lot to be said around that. But the journey, learning that you are responsible for others, I think came to me a bit later. And I think knowing that leadership is as much around people, if not more about people, than it is the task and the business and the demands of that. So yeah, I would certainly say that what shaped me was understanding that you have a bigger responsibility than just yourself, than just going to work and performing a task and coming home. You're now responsible for other people, for processes, for the future of certain initiatives or whatever it may be. So yeah, understanding that the task is important, and you wouldn't be in those roles if you weren't able to take responsibility for the task, but understanding that you need to take people with you, and that they're a huge part of the leadership journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, that's a huge value for me, the people side, but it is interesting to see that there are leaders who are so deep into the task and the delivery that the people are an afterthought. And so it's interesting to hear that you said, because of your upbringing and the way that the behaviors you've developed, when you came to that realization that, you really, adopted that approach, that the people are integral to being successful as a leader. Just were there any like really early on leadership opportunities you had, like maybe captain of your football team or anything like that? Like, did you show any early signs of interest in leadership or a natural aptitude or anything like that in your childhood maybe?
Um, yes, but not consciously aware of what leadership was. So I played a sport at university. I coached and managed a team, and we were as much a social team as we were a football team, and that was a hell of an experience. And again, I did it because I wanted to run a football team, not because I wanted to be a leader. But you learn certain skills along the way. Even prior to that, there would be opportunities where I was coaching and coaching groups. So from an early age, I was, believe it or not, I was a trampoline coach for a couple of years when I was still at school, and then a football coach, and then I was coaching summer camps. And when you look back and you think, well, you're having to manage large groups or small groups or of children, and anyone that's worked with youth populations or children know they're pretty difficult to manage. So yeah, I think there were earlier exposures to what, I suppose, influencing or managing or leading groups. That gave me the experience, but I don't think I was ever consciously aware that this is leadership and this is what I want to do. But that came a bit later on. That came when I realised that, I love exercise and fitness. I love strength and conditioning. I love being able to impact an athlete directly. And then I realised that after a certain amount of time, I could probably have a bigger influence if I was in a leadership role, because then I can have influence on people working with the athletes. So it took a while for me to come to terms with the fact that I am now taking a step away from directly interfacing with the athlete to now directly interfacing with the staff that interact with the athlete. So I'm now indirectly impacting or influencing the pathway of an athlete or an organisation or a department, but you have a wider scope to influence and impact performance, in my opinion. So yeah, I suppose subconsciously very incompetent right at the beginning, but subconsciously unaware of the leadership roles or the managerial roles that I was partaking in, and then becoming very more conscious and aware of what that was and the importance of it within, say, my role at Arsenal at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite normal as well. To kind of go down that route and become more and more aware the more you kind of get into it, and I guess that shows like a very natural leadership ability because you're not really that conscious yet. You are leading your uni football team or whatever. And so, yeah, it's definitely interesting. So, kind of thinking about some of the roles you've had, are there any areas that you can think of, maybe some specific examples where your leadership has had quite a big impact on the organization, whether it's a particular project or it's a big change in direction or it's a restructure or anything really? But is there any examples you can think of in terms of real specific impact that your leadership has brought?
Yeah, I suppose I'll draw upon one example of the role I'm in at the moment, and it was something that I learned from sort of quite deeply actually, and it came from basically setting up performance projects within the organisation or within the department, and it was the opportunity across say 20, 21 people. We set up 4 performance projects. We appointed project leads, project coordinators, and then the people that worked within those projects. So we were giving people opportunities to lead upon a process with guidance from myself and another member of staff. And what that allowed us to do, what that allowed them to do was collaborate, communicate, take something from its infancy. So let's take it was a speed and agility project as an example, and how do we systematically implement that within an organisation that spans, across 2 sites, multiple disciplines, and across 10 age groups and up to 200 players. So it's a big project, and instead of the people at the top of the organisational tree telling people what to do, it was an opportunity to empower others to do it. And what I found was, over a year's project, they came up with ideas I would have never come up with. They came up with concepts that were like incredibly rich and deep. And I think from me, I learned as much from that experience as I think everyone else did within the department. Was if you give people the right guidance, the right support, and you empower them, they will. And I don't mean this in a disrespect, but they will pleasantly surprise you, because they will go above and beyond, and they will produce work collectively that independently I certainly couldn't have got to, and I think independently they wouldn't have got to. But through that level of collaboration and cooperation, they were able to sort of develop and implement something that I think is incredibly high level.
Now, thanks for that example. I want to delve a little bit deeper into kind of the mechanics of this because
Mm.
people talk about the outcome of leadership decisions they've made or things they put in place, structures or whatever. But the mechanics of it is interesting for me and hopefully for our listeners, because clearly there was a large amount of work up front for you in terms of the organization of setting up projects and project leads and assigning people to the projects and that kind of thing. So there's the actual the nitty-gritty mechanics of getting things like this set up, and then you use the word like systematically, and that's another real key part of leadership, doing things in an organized and systematic way. And then a few other things that you really mentioned that were important, to me anyway, and that really stood out were the point that you said that you just wanted to empower people, and then they kind of pleasantly surprised you. And then finally, and I'm throwing loads here at you, that you said like independently, probably you wouldn't have been as successful, but with everyone collaborating and working together, you got a better result. So there's a lot there, but like are you intentional about your approach in terms of, right, I need to be structured, organized in setting up these projects, and I need to do this, or are you just flying by the seat of your pants?
The former.
I think I know the answer, but
um, so yeah, you're 100% right. I may have made it sound pretty simple, but it would have been a conversation around identifying strengths, weaknesses, but mainly opportunities and gaps within the provision that we were providing. And that came from conversations with the relevant staff. So if we go back to the speed and agility project, for example, I would be speaking to the physical performance coaches, the sports scientists, the coaches, and identifying that was a need, that was an area for development. So first of all, it's identifying that there is an opportunity to develop the provision, and then it was around, okay, we are going to put a team together, a project team together. What's the composition of that? And I think you've got to look at the skill set, you've got to look at the characters, and I think that comes down to the staff that you've got. What's the experience they have? What's the longevity they've had within the business, within the organisation? What's the knowledge set they've got? And I think once you have identified the gap, you've identified the composition of the team, and that goes to, you want diverse people, you want diverse perspectives within that team, but you also want a thread of commonality so they can always draw back to what it is that their formal education was, or whatever it may be. And then it's about setting very clear outcome measures, and timelines. So in this example, we said by the end of the season, we would like to have a development framework that you guys have produced. So there was a very clear timeline, expectations along the way. We had milestones. So we had 2 check-in points where they would present back to the whole team and they would get their feedback. And that was important for a number of reasons, but one of them would have been making sure that other people were on board with the direction of the project as well. So that they had an opportunity to impact and influence that project along the way. And it wasn't a siloed project with 4 or 5 people working on it. And so there was clear outlined expectations, timelines, and roles and responsibilities within that. So if you were a project coordinator, a project manager, or you were part of the project team, there were expectations there. And then my role within that would have been to provide the project lead support and guidance and the resources to go and get external support if they needed it. If they wanted to go and speak to an expert within the field, it was my job then to facilitate that interaction. It was my job to create time and space for them to meet. So, I think that, there was a lot that goes into it. But I think when you look at the inputs, it's the people and the resources. When you look at how you mediate that, so if you look at the mediators within that, you've got to provide them opportunity to collaborate. For me, to be able to collaborate to a high level, everyone needs to have very clear, shared ideas of what it is we're striving for, how we're going to do it, and what we need to do it, and what are the roles and responsibilities of each person within that collective.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I knew there would be a lot more behind this, and I appreciate you unpacking that. And I think there's some examples there of where your leadership skills have overlapped with your management, because there's some project management stuff in there in terms of milestones and feedback and check-in points. And I think some people think that with leadership, you just kind of cast the vision, set the ball rolling, get people going, and then just leave them to it. But it's not that at all. There's a level of follow up and check-ins, and like you said, being available to get external support if people need it, or you were supporting your project leads yourself. So there's a lot involved, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think when people get promoted into leadership roles, I think it's really important to understand that you've been moved into a leadership role. And now, quite often, people are moved into those roles because they were very good at their current role. So if you're a physiotherapist or you're a sports scientist, you often then get the lead role within that discipline because you were good at that role. And I believe it's called the Peter Principle, where you get promoted to the level of incompetence within your new role. So, leadership's very different to being a practitioner. Now, you can still lead being a practitioner, but being a leader, I think you need to kind of accept that you are there to facilitate others doing their job to the best of their ability. You are there to remove interference and obstacles to allow them to do their job and perform at the highest level. It's to protect them from the hierarchy and the bureaucracy and the red tape. It's basically to help others, to develop others, and to support others to do their job to the best of their ability. And I think that's a very big change from being on the grass or being in the physio room or whatever else. So, I think it's a big realization.
And so, have you gone out and done anything to develop your leadership skills? Or, I mean, clearly I'm sure you invest a lot in yourself and you've worked hard at this, but what have you done to be able to go from being kind of pitch side as a, top level S&C coach to suddenly leading a big part of a successful organization?
Um, I mean, if I was to, I'm just going to reflect very quickly on where I was at my previous club to where I'm at now. I mean, the organisation allows me to, so the Arsenal where I'm at the moment, they allow me the opportunity to do my job to a higher level than my previous club because I am non-operational within my current role. So I'm not on the grass. So my focus can be on the staff, it can be on the system and the structure, it can be on the inputs and how we can improve our resources, it can be on identifying the specific outcomes. In my previous role at my previous club, I was still on the grass on a daily basis whilst being lead of many disciplines across two sites and multiple tens and tens of players. So it was incredibly difficult. And I think, when you spread yourself too thinly, especially when I wasn't an experienced or a very good leader, if I'm being brutally honest, I was incredibly task focused. And I've now learned through experience. I've learned through working under leaders that I didn't particularly value. I think that is equally as valuable working within the realm of challenge, within the realm of adversity, understanding that if I was ever to be in a role of or a position of power or influence, I do not want to make people feel a certain way. I want to provide them with an environment that is conducive for optimal working conditions. Equally, I've worked with coaches and I've worked with leaders that have been incredibly giving. They've been incredibly sort of fruitful in my development as well. And that might be the behaviours that they role model. It could be the expectations they set for their staff. It could be how they held themselves and others to a level of discipline and high work ethic. So I think there's a lot to be said around learning through experience. And someone said it quite recently, and I thought it was a great phrase, which is you can't shortcut experience. So and I think if you are a reflective person and you can reflect back and go, that was a positive experience that has helped shape me in this way. Equally, that was a relatively negative experience, but still I learned a lot from it and I am better for it. So I think there's definitely a piece around being reflective, learning through your experiences. Formally, I've not done a leadership qualification, but I am hopefully within the next 12 months completing my PhD, which is around team effectiveness. There is a piece in there that, again, hopefully should be published within the next 12 months around leading performance support teams. So where I felt there was maybe a lack of theoretical, empirical knowledge around this area, I've decided to research it myself and try and learn more about it and read around other domains and what they do around leadership within, say, military, education, healthcare, and try and draw on those and then try and apply that within the realm of elite sport performance. And so there's that piece. And then I'm doing a course with the Premier League at the moment as well, which is bringing leaders from different sectors together periodically, once a month for a couple of days. And it's quite a holistic leadership journey that will take 2 years to complete this course. But even obviously prior to that, I mean, having a passion for the area, for self-development, reading books in your spare time, which all sounds very cheesy, but there was certainly an interest for the last probably 10 years or so for me where I was actively reading books in my spare time. And because I was and not because I was desperate to be the next best leader, but because I was just genuinely interested in how to perform to a higher level. So yeah, that's a very waffly answer, but ultimately learning through your experiences, trying to gain some formal understanding of the concepts that will contribute, and then sort of having a passion for it, having that desire to want to get better and engage in development opportunities. I've learned a lot through talking to other leaders as well, and I've been very lucky to do that through my PhD. And I've learned a lot just through those conversations with other people from very diverse sort of sporting backgrounds, but are high level leaders. And again, just gleaning as much as I can from them as well, I find is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of leaders I speak to, the good ones, successful ones, say similar things. A lot of their learning has come from reflection on, I'm not going to be like that leader, and I want some of the traits of that really good leader. So just reflecting on some of their experiences of leaders that they've been under, and then just gleaning off other people, like literally the number of people who've mentored me without even knowing it, just because I've been like observing them, or stalking them from a distance, just to watch how they behave, how they act, and how they do this, and how they do decision making, and so on, is interesting. So I'm not surprised that you've said some of those things, and I want to come back to your PhD and some of the more sort of formal side of leadership in a minute. I would like to just ask you now about maybe some of the unique challenges as a leader. I was speaking to somebody recently who was just saying that he's moved into leadership roles over time, and is now at a position where like his leadership is decision making, and he's like, genuinely day to day I'm making decisions, and a lot of the time they're just 50-50, and I don't even know it's not like, oh, 80% I should do this, 20% I should do that. Okay, so it's an obvious decision to go down this route. He's like, genuinely it's often 50-50, and I have to really dig deep into my intuition, into my wisdom, my past experiences, leaning on people around me, because leadership is a lot of it's about decision making. So my question to you is, what are some of the unique challenges that you've faced? You've told some of the real positive stuff and the impact you've had. What do you think some of the challenges are that you face either day to day, or that you've had in the past, that have really helped you learn, mold you, shaped you, and so on?
The challenges, I think one that I've reflected on since being in my current role is understanding that you are serving multiple stakeholders, and sometimes they will have conflicting and competing demands. And I think for me that was an eye opener. You might see it as, I've got my direct line report, my line manager, and I've got my team. And if I can satisfy the needs of my team, and I can facilitate them doing their job to the best of their ability, and I can meet the demands of what my boss wants of me, then I can be or will be successful. What you learn is actually there are multiple stakeholders that will want and have an opinion or a perspective on how successful, how well you're doing within your role. And I think I think if I was, if you're truly to reflect on that, if I was to come into the role again, it would be right. I would identify who are my primary stakeholders, and then who are my secondary stakeholders, and then as long as you can address the primary, but also secondary to that, can you meet with the secondary stakeholders and make sure that you are somewhat meeting their demands, or certainly satisfying their needs as well. So, yeah, I think that was probably my biggest learning in the last 18 months or so, is understanding that it is very multifaceted. It's very sort of multi-directional. It's not a linear organisational structure that if I do X, I will be successful. It's very much. And I'll give you an example. Recently there was a couple of coaches that wanted my support in a decision making process, but both wanted support to achieve a different outcome. That in itself was very challenging, because you're in a position where you're trying to meet the needs of stakeholders that are within the same group that want a different outcome. And so that was particularly challenging, because you then have to sort of boil it down to what is the root cause of this dysfunctional. And it was a good, challenging conversation. It wasn't dysfunctional. It wasn't toxic. It wasn't anything that was going to cause sort of lasting damage. But let's boil it back to what is the problem here, and then how are we going to address it collectively, and then how are we going to implement something so that this doesn't happen again. And I think that was really important. Is okay, we've addressed this issue, we've addressed this challenge, and now how can we ensure this doesn't happen again? Because there's going to be many, many challenges within the leadership journey. You can't really be dealing with making the same mistakes, or addressing the same challenge over and over again. So again, that was another challenge for me, was boiling it back, having communication with several different parties, and then coming to a sort of conclusive decision, and implementing a strategy that hopefully avoids the same future challenges in the future challenges in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. No, I mean, it takes courage and maturity to do that, because there's lots of ways of kind of just sweeping stuff under the carpet or ignoring stuff. So in that vein, have you got any examples? And I don't want to put you in a difficult situation, so don't name names or whatever, but of like, because you said earlier you've learned from some bad leadership experiences. What are the kind of those particular qualities that you've gone, I don't want that, or those particular behaviors that have really helped shape you into who you are now, because of bad leadership, bad experiences? Can you highlight anything there?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I'll say is, I think another lesson I learned along the way was being able to separate the person from their decision making. So it doesn't mean to say that just because you don't agree with someone's uh, choice within a decision, or an opinion, it doesn't mean that they are bad, or they just have a different perspective. So I struggled with that initially, and then when you come to terms with people aren't their decisions, and that you can separate the two, and you can still have a personal relationship with people that professionally you might not agree with. So that's probably my first point, is a lesson I
Mm.
learned, but took me a while to learn that, because I think early career practitioners and leaders may take things more personally, and I think you need to boil things down to objectivity and understanding what the root cause is, and then go from there. But the I suppose the main negative is probably a strong word, but the things that I thought I would like to avoid as much as possible was the micromanagement, was the interference of line managers interfering with what you were doing within your domain. Um, so the complete opposite to what the research would say, or what most leaders want, which is they want autonomy and they want guidance, they want support. So the complete opposite to that is micromanagement. So you're getting interference, you're being told what to do, and it very much undermines you. It very much, you then create a relationship and an environment where there's a lack of trust, and that can be really disruptive when you're trying to achieve whatever outcomes or outputs that you've set out to achieve. So the when people micromanage, and I think a lack of transparency. I think when people don't address issues, don't speak to you, choose not to have the challenging conversations, I think also that promotes a lack of understanding. It promotes a lack of trust, and I think that can create also a very negative environment. So those were, say, two things that I'd have experienced across my journey. And also, if you've got managers that undermine what you're doing, it then allows for others to infiltrate and to find holes, and it goes from being professionally challenging to almost toxic. So I think, and I think trust is something that will come up time and time again when you're within a leadership role. Is you're trying to build it, you're trying to retain it, and it's hard to build, and it takes a long time to build. But it's you make one wrong move, and you can take that away very, very quickly. So yeah, I think the
Yeah.
two things that I tried to avoid was micromanaging staff moving forward, and also giving people clarity on what it is they needed, what they wanted, what the expectations were, and trying to be as open and as honest with people. And even if they don't like hearing what I've got to say, I would rather say it and be open and honest and transparent, and move forward beyond it, because hopefully that builds trust in itself.
Yeah. It's clear that you've taken these learnings, and it's clear in the way you've described your management and what I know of you as a person, that you've really kind of it's helped shape the opposite in you. So you're a very empowering person, which is the opposite of micromanaging. You empower people to use their skills and abilities. You guide them, you give them autonomy, and you help them thrive, basically. And it's interesting that you've observed what you don't want to be and created a culture, because I guess it's about culture. The behaviors that you've described that are negative create that toxic culture. The opposite behaviors that you instill and that you hold strongly create that culture of trust and integrity, honesty, empowerment, and so on. And I know which culture I would I'd rather work in. So thanks for sharing that and for kind of being honest about some of the things you've experienced. I want to go back now to kind of your PhD. You might want to touch on a little bit and some of your learnings there, but my question is around what are the models and frameworks and inspirations that you maybe lean on, or that have had an impact on you, or that you go back to time, or maybe a model that you've developed yourself around leadership? Because I know that you have read a lot. I know that you've gone deep with your PhD, and I know that you like models and frameworks as well. It sounds, the way you talk, it's like, yeah, I just read stuff, but I know that there's a lot more behind you than that. And so I'd love you to kind of, yeah, just share some of those models or frameworks or rules of thumb that you like to operate by. Is there anything that really stands out or jumps out?
Yeah, I suppose if I start the PhD journey, I'm looking at the characteristics of effective performance support teams in elite sport. And so far, there's been a focus group study where I've interviewed those working within performance support teams. There's I've done semi-structured interviews with leaders of those performance support teams, and I'm currently completing a Delphi study as well, which should give us a global picture of what we believe. And that's not just within football. This is across sports. So the first study was across Formula One, Premier League football, and then a winter and a summer Olympic sport, for example. But the model at the heart of it is team effectiveness, which is grounded in organisational psychology, if you will, and other domains have used it: education, military, healthcare, so on and so forth. And basically, it boils down to you've got your inputs, you've got your mediators, and then you've got your outputs. And so when we think about inputs, what are the individual inputs? And that could be the individual team members that you have within it. It could be at a team level. So what is the composition of your team? How is it structured? Are they centralized? Are they decentralized? Are they part-time? Are they full-time? And then you've got sort of every organizational collective will work within an ecosystem and environment as well. So what and you mentioned it, culture. What are the values? What are the norms? What are the micro politics within that specific environment? So they are all of the things that you would consider inputs into whether a team is going to be effective. But then when you move to the middle part of the model, and they call them mediators, not just processes, because processes would more or less refer to processes. So that might be the planning, the implementation, the execution, the evaluation of task, if you will. But then you have emergent states. So you might have cognitive emergent states and effective emergent states. The best way to think of those are they are all, so it's almost like they're all like connected. So if you've got team processes as your behaviors, and they overlap with those two emergent states, and really they sort of, it's quite cyclical. So let's take an example. If we look to create if I have regular team meetings where I update the staff, we have effective information sharing processes. I'm very clear on what the outcomes are of certain projects. Everyone understands their roles and responsibility within the department. We all know what the academy's vision is and how our roles contribute to the bigger picture. That in itself will lead to the cognitive emergent state of a shared mental model. So everyone has then that ability to know, right, Pete, your responsibility is X, your roles are Y. Perry, the same, so on and so forth. But that then might allow you to collaborate to a higher level, because you then know who to interact with to help with certain tasks and certain projects. And it feeds around. If we increase cohesion, and again, you can break cohesion down into tasks. Can we work together effectively to achieve a task? Yes or no. But then you have the ability to be cohesive on a social level as well. What is the desire to want to spend time together away from task? And what was interesting was, through the talks, through the interviews that I've had through my PhD, is people reflect on it and say team members within the sporting team don't have to necessarily have social cohesion, was their opinion. Okay, and they don't, I'm obviously talking to staff members, not players or athletes here. They believe that as long as they had task cohesion and they knew what needed to be done, how they needed to collaborate and work together to achieve the outcome, that was fine. But for the staff themselves, they wanted a high level of social cohesion. And again, if you've got that social cohesion and you build that, and you have, through things like spending time together outside of work, you get to know the person better. You get to know the team better. You understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. And what that does then is it obviously improves cohesion. It improves the level of trust that you have as a team in each other. And again, that might go round then to the effective emergent states of trust, cohesion, collectiveness, so on and so forth. And then the outputs is obviously, now that would be very department or organizational specific. So then you could break that down to, is that the individual goal, the team goal, the organizational goal? Is it objective? Is it points on the board? Is it seconds in a race? Is it wins per season? Is it more of a subjective objective in which is it member satisfaction within the team? Are they happy working within the team? Do you have high retention within your staff, for example? Those types of things. So that's probably harder to assess and get into the crux of, because every organisation, even within the same sport, will have different outputs and different outcomes. But I think understanding that, as a leader, you might not be able to control all of the inputs, but you will have a way of coordinating those inputs and maximising them. So if you've got characters that are particularly strong in an area, you put them into roles, or you put them into projects, or you put them into areas where they can maximise those. And then we use other people to maybe assist with their areas of development. But then you obviously identify those and you try and develop them. And so, yeah, it's a big piece. But if you said to me, look, how do I break it down? And it's I know I'm talking a lot here, Pete. So just cut me off.
Carry on. I'm lapping it up. It's really good.
Obviously there's probably as many theories on leadership as there are definitions, which is a lot. Okay, so there's pretty much been a journey from sort of the great man, the trait aspect of, if you have these traits, you'll be a good leader, for example, through to the transformational leadership, where it's now understanding people's emotions, motivations, so on and so forth, being a servant, being authentic, so on and so forth. And so for me, if you said, how have I sort of merged all of the models and the frameworks, I break sort of leadership down into three. And the first thing is people. So do we recruit well? So and I would break even that down further and say, that we would recruit people that are competent, have good character, but also culturally fit the environment. Do we retain staff? Do we reward them adequately? Do we provide them with value and purpose? And then do we develop them? And again, that can go back to, having interactions with them, giving them feedback, providing appropriate CPD, making sure that, we are fulfilling their aspirations as well as what's good for the team and what's good for the organisation. So if that's the people piece, then you've got the strategy piece, and that I think can be broken down pretty simply into where are we, where do we want to get to, and how are we going to get there. And then again, you could probably break that down into where are we. Let's assess our current state, our status quo, our opportunities, our areas for development. Let's identify our vision. Where is it we want to get to? And then how are we going to get there? Or what things are we going to implement along the way to achieve that? So I think I've made strategy sound like it's very very fluffy there, but in my opinion, it can be broken down into where are we, assessment, where have we got to get to, vision, and how are we going to get there, right? Strategies and tactics to achieve that, and then finally, it's about the environment. And again, I could probably talk all day on this, but I'd probably try and break it down into how can you create a psychologically safe environment where people feel safe to speak up, to challenge, to feel like their voice is not just being heard, but is valued. Sorry, I think that is incredibly important. That is based on trust and will build trust. And then you have, can you create an environment that's cohesive? Because within that, then you can have the ability to collaborate as well. So, and again, you could talk about a lot of its sort of emergent states that would come out of that. But for me, if you said to me, what's the primary one? Is creating a psychologically safe environment would be first and foremost, to allow the other things to happen.
Mm. Fantastic. I mean, there's so much depth that you've
Sorry.
gone into, and you're just scratching the surface, I know, but there's a lot there, especially that, well, both parts, but that second part with the people, the strategy, the environment. I love that. Can I come work for you, by the way? Because I'd love to work, or can you mentor me? Because this is really this is really good.
Certainly, certainly, you can come do my role.
No thanks. You make it sound easier than it is, but on just still on this kind of models, frameworks, inspirations, is there any like piece of research or book or person or people and can you pick out one kind of influence or mentor or anything that's really been helpful in your journey that you just want to pinpoint? Because I know there's so much.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. There's so many. I wouldn't say, well, other than obviously the research that's going on by a lot of people within this area in sports science, sports medicine, the ability to sort of promote shared leadership, so on and so forth. The things that I would reflect back on, and I read this book a long time ago, but I always refer back to it. It was I think it's Stephen Covey. That it was the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I believe it is.
Yeah.
There was that one. I think it's is it Simon Sinek's Starting with Why.
Yeah.
And the other one I was chatting to a colleague about the other day was How to Win Friends and Influence People. And probably the first one, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There'll still be 2 of those habits there that I will reflect on quite regularly, and I will always say things like, let's start with the end in mind, and that was there's a whole habit and whole chapter around that, and then another one that's always stuck with me, and I try and live by, and by no means get it right all the time, but it's seek first to understand before being understood. So I think when we talk about influential sort of literature that I've read. Obviously, those types of books are far easier to read than empirical research, but those I found have sort of influenced me on my journey and allowed me to understand, strategy, but also the importance of influencing people. I've got to say, my current boss at the moment, Per Mertesacker, is an incredible leader, and obviously he showed that in his playing years on the pitch, but as someone that sort of heads up a huge arm of Arsenal Football Club. He's very good at providing clarity on what we're trying to achieve globally. He provides autonomy to all of his academy management team. He supports them in however they feel fit to achieve the outcomes that we've agreed collectively. So very good. But I couldn't go through all of them. I've had some great managers in the past. And I've worked with some amazing coaches that I've learned a lot from along the way. So yeah, sorry to anyone that I've not mentioned, but yeah, there's a lot of people that have positively and negatively sort of influenced
Yeah.
me to be where I am today, which I'm very grateful to all those people for.
Great. Fantastic. I mean, we're pretty much out of time. We could go on and on. I could talk to you for ages because I'd love to grill you more on some of these areas, and maybe one day we'll be able to do a follow up. But just want to say a big thank you. But just before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add? Any thoughts that you've had as you've been talking that you thought, I really want listeners to hear this, or anything that you were thinking beforehand that you think would be useful, or just any closing comments from you?
I've said it before, but you can't shortcut experience. So, and I think it's really important to understand that even if you're not in a managerial position, you can still be a leader, and leader is about influence. And if you can grow your circle of influence, and that's probably lifted completely out of Starting with Why, the book I just mentioned, if you can grow your circle of influence, you will naturally become a leader, and you don't need to be in a managerial position to do that. So I think that the more experience and practice you have around influencing others, the better leader you will be when you are in a managerial position, if that is something that people want to pursue.
Excellent. Some absolute gems there. I've got like 4 pages of notes that I've taken, and I need to look back on that. But just want to say a big thanks. Really appreciate your time. I know there's a lot of demands on your time with your job, your family, your study, and so on. So really appreciate it, Perry. Thank you so much for all the insights, and yeah, can't wait to see you again and speak to you more.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Pete. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.